Hello students, I ended my previous audio presentation. In that line, I was eager to forge ahead. But before I move on to the next paragraph for discussion, I want to explain this paragraph one more time. See, Tibet's most venerated stretch of water. Ancient Hindu and Buddhist cosmology pinpoints Mansarovar as the source of four great Indian rivers. That means the four great Indian rivers merge into it. What are those four great Indian rivers? The Indus, the Ganges, the Satluj, and the Brahmaputra. Actually, only the Satluj flows from the lake, but specifically from the geographical point of view, from the geographical aspect, only the Satluj flows from the lake, but the headwaters of the others means the others, Indus, Ganges, and Brahmaputra, the headwaters of the others, all rise nearby on the flanks of Mount Kailash. The headwaters of the other three all rise from the Mount Kailash region. Flanks means nearby places or nearby regions. We were within striking distance of the great mountain. Great mountain, here the author Nick Middleton refers to Mount Kailash, and I was eager to forge ahead. I was eager to move ahead. But I had to wait. Now, why so? Why the author had to wait? Shitan told me to go and drink some tea in Hort's only cafe, which, like all the other buildings in town, was constructed from badly painted concrete and had three broken windows. I already told you, and you all know by this time, that Hor is a grim and miserable place. It is actually very much dilapidated, semi-decayed place, and very dirty, full of dirt and dust. And the cafe where the author went to have some warm coffee or tea, that place was also broken, and it seems that it is poorly constructed also. And surprising thing, it was the only cafe in Hor, in that place. So I repeat, Shitan told me to go and drink some tea in Hort's only cafe, which, like all the other buildings in town, was constructed from badly painted concrete and had three broken windows. So windows were broken, even the concrete was also poorly constructed. The good view of the lake through one of them helped to compensate for the drought. But the important thing is that despite the place is rugged, despite the infrastructure was very much inferior, a source of consolation as well as a source of perennial delight for the author is obviously that he could see a majestic and a panoramic viewpoint of the lake Mansarovar by sitting in that particular cafe. So that was a blessing in disguise, apart from the inferior setup where he went to have some tea or warm coffee. I was served by a Chinese youth in military uniform who spread the grease around on my table with a filthy rag. Filthy means something dirty. Before bringing me a glass and a thermos of tea. So a Chinese youth wearing a military uniform, he served the author a glass and a thermos, obviously flask of warm tea. Half an hour later, Shitan relieved me from my solitary confinement. Solitary confinement because the author was feeling lonely. And dear students, also you will get to know that he came not in the right season. It was off-season time. So off-season time, that means few people were there, and he was feeling very lonely because he can't communicate also properly. Because mainly the people, they used to speak in Buddhist language or Tibetan language, and it was very difficult for him to communicate. So he was feeling very lonely, he was feeling quite alone at that time, when half an hour later Shitan relieved him from his solitary confinement. He was feeling very much like a prisoner in a cell. So Shitan relieved him from that. And we drove past a lot more rocks and rubbish westwards out of town towards Mount Kailash. And then again I get inside the car of Shitan and we drove. My experience of horror came as a stark contrast to accounts I had read of earlier travelers' first encounters with Lake Mansarovar. Now you will find regarding two famous travelers. One was a Japanese and another one was a Swedish traveler. And this part also is very important for short questions. So I repeat, my experience in horror came as a stark contrast to accounts I had read of earlier travelers' first encounters with Lake Mansarovar. Akai Kawaguchi, a Japanese monk who had arrived there in 1900, was so moved by the sanctity means serene beauty, purity, holiness, so moved by the sanctity of the lake that he burst into tears. A couple of years later, the hallowed water had a similar effect on Seven Hedin, another famous Swedish traveler who wasn't prone to sentimental outbursts. Now, unlike Akai Kawaguchi, who was so much impressed by the ethereal beauty or panoramic serene beauty of the Lake Mansarovar when he visited in the year 1900, there was emotional outburst in him. He cried. But Seven Hedin, who came later, a couple of years later, you might say 2 years later, he was very much impressed, but he haven't cried like Akai Kawaguchi. Now, from narrator only we get to know about these two information. And remember, I told you all that this part is important regarding the two travelers who visited Lake Mansarovar way back in the early part of the 19th century is very important. It was dark. By the way, I am moving on to the next paragraph now, dear students. Let me continue. It was dark by the time we finally left again, and after 10:30 p.m. we drew up outside a guest house in Darchen. Now, compared to Hor, Darchen is a fairly clean place. In comparison with Hor, Darchen is a fairly clean place. So I repeat, it was dark by the time we finally left again, and after 10:30 p.m. we drew up outside a guest house in Darchen for what turned out to be another troubled night. Because troubled night for the author, because way back at the middle of the journey also I discussed previously, he was having breathing problem also and headache also, and he was suffering from cold and cough also. So let me continue. Kicking around in the open air rubbish dump that passed, I repeat, it was dark by the time we finally left again, and after 10:30 p.m. we drew up outside a guest house in Darchen for what turned out to be another troubled night. Kicking around in the open air rubbish dump that passed for the town of Hor had set off my cold once more. I already told you all that he was suffering from cold and cough. It seems that again he was suffering from it one more time. Though if truth be told, it had never quite disappeared with my herbal tea. It never ever disappeared with his herbal tea. He had some herbal tea or green tea as we call, but it was still there. He was still suffering from that cold and cough. One of my nostrils never quite disappeared. With one of my nostrils was blocked again. I already told you he was having breathing problem also. So one of my nostrils was blocked again, and I lay down to sleep. I wasn't convinced that the other would provide me with sufficient oxygen. That means the other part of the nostril. My watch told me I was at 4,760 meters. The altimeter that was in his watch told him that he was at a height of 4,760 meters. It wasn't much higher than Ravu. Remember Ravu at the very beginning, in the very first paragraph, we read about the base camp or the place like Ravu. Now Darchin is also a base camp or a place. And all these are related with the top of the mountainous summit, we can say. So I repeat, it wasn't much higher than Ravu, and there I had been gasping for oxygen. Gasping means desperately. I was searching for oxygen to breathe, gasping for oxygen several times every night. I had grown accustomed means used to these nocturnal disturbances by now. Nocturnal means that happens during the time at night. I had grown accustomed to these nocturnal disturbances by now, but they still scared me. But the author was very much scared because he was having cold and cough, and this is a very strange place to him. So apart from that, though he has been used to this because he had already undertaken the journey and already many days passed by, but still this sort of breathing problem scared him a lot. Now I am moving on to the next paragraph. Tired and hungry, I started breathing through my mouth. After a while, I switched to single nostril power, which seemed to be admitting enough oxygen. It is like an inhaler that he used so that he could get that oxygen inside his body, because he was having a sort of oxygen deficiency also at that time. But just as I was drifting off, I woke up abruptly. Abruptly means all of a sudden. Something was wrong. My chest felt strangely heavy, and I sat up, a movement that cleared the nasal passages or my nasal passages almost instantly and relieved the feeling in my chest. Curious, I thought. Now that inhaler worked. He used it, and then he slept a bit. Then all of a sudden he woke up. Maybe he got a bit scared also. And after he woke up, he found that he was feeling a bit relieved. And the important thing is that even the blocked nasal passage was also cleared. Now both his nasal passages are cleared totally. And he got a relief also. And previously his chest was, he was feeling a bit heavy in his chest, but now that heaviness got relieved. And he was very curious. Ultimately it happened. He got very lucky, and at the same time he got very much relieved also. So dear students, I have discussed up to curious, I thought. In my next audio presentation, I will continue from the next paragraph. Dear students, listen to this particular audio presentation, and if there is any doubt, kindly clarify. I will clear it up once again. Thank you, students. Thank you all.